Welcome to Telford Wrekin Council Planning Committee. This evening's meeting is held in public to ensure that all those involved or interested in the planning applications can see and hear how the decisions are made. It's important that the speakers are able to present their information without interruption, and that the council members of the committee are able to hear and consider the material presented. Only those people who have been notified are able to speak. I ask everyone else to remain quiet, not to interrupt the meeting, and to allow the members to make their decisions. I remind everyone that council meetings can be photographed or recorded, and I ask all participants to recognise the importance of the planning process. And finally, please everyone silence or turn off their mobile phones. Welcome to the meeting. Item 1 on the agenda is apologies for absence.
Yes, Chair, we have apologies from Councillor Kelly Middleton and Councillor James Lavery is substitute, and from Councillor Raj Mehta and Councillor Kuldapsata is substitute.
Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest on the agenda? Yes,
I did ask a question, but I didn't get an answer back. I am councillor for Meady Town Council, but I don't represent Woodside. I represent Sutton. There's no.
I think just that fact in itself doesn't justify the interest that you
I don't think it would, but I just wanted to mention it.
Okay, thank you, Judge. Any other declaration of interest? No. Item 3, the minutes of the previous meeting. Are there true and correct record? Yes. The remover? Seconder? All those in favour?
I wasn't here, Charles.
No, sure. Item 4, deferred or withdrawn applications.
For an on-chair.
No deferred or withdrawn applications. Item 5, site visits.
They're an on-chair.
None planned at the moment. Right. Item 6, plan application for determination. And we have 2 on the agenda. 6.1 is TWC 2020-0941 Norwood House Hotel, Pave Lane, Newport. Mark, if you will present that.
Thank you, Chair. Members will have attended a site visit this afternoon in respect of this application. The application seeks full planning permission to convert the existing function and dining section of the existing restaurant of Norwood House Hotel into 5 additional hotel rooms. This application seeks half retrospective planning permission, as the majority of the works to convert the building have already taken place. The additional rooms have resulted in the removal of one of the hotel's dining and function rooms. However, there is maintained dining provision elsewhere on the ground floor of the hotel. The application also seeks to replace 12 existing windows of the property to the front and both sides, and those works have not yet been undertaken. It's proposed that the works run a like-for-like basis with timber windows. The application has been subject to amended plans during the course of the application and subsequent reconsultation. Amendments follow initial objections from the Council's Built Heritage Specialist regarding elements which have now been removed from the proposal, which included decking. Other amendments include the submission of additional information to support the proposal, namely an additional planning statement and management plan. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mark, for introducing the report. I now have 3 speakers who have notified they want to speak. Councillor B. Page from the Chetwynd and Woodcut Parish Council. Councillor Page with us?
We welcome the LPA's recognition that this building is worthy of architectural and heritage protection by the improvements now required. The NPPF Para 92 says planning policies and decisions should aim to achieve healthy, inclusive and safe places which are safe and accessible, so that crime and disorder and the fear of crime do not undermine the quality of life or community cohesion. We have discussed how we can afford our residents this protection, particularly because of recent experiences when this hotel accommodated very vulnerable people without appropriate support, and as stated in the LPA report para 826, could be linked to being a house of multiple occupation or hostel. Residents of Chetwynd, Aston and Woodcote must have their rights for health, safety, security and enjoyment of their environment protected, as this is their home. They are not transient. Although planners have tried to mitigate some concerns, they describe antisocial behaviour, noise and disturbance as civil matters between residents and the applicant. The applicant has in the recent past seemed unable to curtail this behaviour, and the police and ambulance services have attended the hotel on many occasions, as is evidenced by residents' objections to this application. The LPA has stated that they have processed this application as the business returning to its previous role as a hotel, and suggest conditions should accompany any planning consent, which we welcome. However, we wish to raise some concerns. The first condition requires the hotel to operate in accordance with the submitted management plan. We do not think this plan is sufficiently robust, nor is there any provision for monitoring its implementation, including ensuring that accommodation is for paying guests only, which should be interpreted broadly as tourists, business guests, or visiting friends or family, where their stay will be usually time limited and will not have specific social needs. The management plan states how the hotel will be marketing its business, but very recent research does not allow any future booking, despite COVID-19 restrictions having been lifted since the 19th of July. The second condition is that an individual shall only reside at the hotel for a period of 28 days at one time, and the hotel be required to keep a logbook of all guests, which could be inspected at any time. We request the conditions state that a guest can only reside at the hotel for a period of 28 days, no return, and also request that a local authority department be nominated as being responsible for the monitoring of this logbook and any outcomes of concern. The third condition, that temporary accommodation scenarios will require only additional information, is very concerning, as the recent problems associated with the hotel were whilst it was operating as such a scenario under COVID-19 legislation. We request therefore that in the event of a temporary accommodation scenario application, this must be in line with new legislation appertaining to a new emergency situation and should include discussion with the parish council. We ask that the planning committee defers full planning consent until the conditions raised as matters of concern are considered further and safeguards provided as requested.
Thank you, Councillor Page. Slightly over the 3 minutes. Yes, thank you. Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Andrew Eade, Ward Councillor. Your experience, Andrew, so you're only going to get 3 minutes.
As ever, Charles, as ever. It says don't move it. No. Yeah. I'm ready now, Charles. Yes, thank you. I'll first provide some background information to this application, as the premises in question are currently operating as a temporary accommodation for vulnerable people who have been placed at Norwood House by Shropshire Council for the duration of the COVID emergency. The country location provides no public transport, no amenities except for a public house, and has caused untold incidents and intolerable problems, which have resulted in severe difficulties for local residents living around the site. Police and ambulances, as Councillor Page has said, have attended emergency calls to the site on numerous occasions, and I believe that the current HMO use of Norwood House is placing the local community at risk of serious harm. Members will note that part of this application is retrospective, as I believe that the work already undertaken without approval may have been originally destined to provide further accommodation for Shropshire Council placements. However, after many months and the removal of some unapproved works, this retrospective application has crystallised into 5 additional budget rooms for apparent use as a hotel. With this in mind, I welcome the necessary condition to restrict occupation to a maximum of 28 days. However, in order to ensure that the rooms are operated as a hotel and not as a main residence, should the committee be minded to grant approval, I would strongly request members to extend that condition to also ensure that no return is made either within 28 days of a hotel stay ending. I would also request that the final paragraph of 8.2.9 is clarified to actually reflect the proposed stay and return periods. Members, I would now like to take issue with the assertion in 8.5.1 that as the restaurant facility is to be removed, the subsequent reduction in customer cars would balance out the car parking spaces required for the 5 extra rooms. However, the said restaurant area remains intact and is not removed by the proposed internal budget bedrooms at all. Consequently, the restaurant could be reactivated at any time by the current or future owners of Norwood House and without any control by this authority. If, or perhaps more likely when that happens, the car park will be totally incapable of coping with the additional 5 vehicles generated by the new rooms and, as a result, will most certainly not comply with our own parking standards. Historically, this car park always used to overflow when the restaurant was open, or on what, as members will now have seen, has an access and egress located on an extremely dangerous bend. As a result, I would ask members to defer this application in order for highways and planning officers to reconsider the effect that 5 new rooms combined together with a reopened restaurant use will have on the limited car parking available. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Andrew. Can I ask Mr. Michael Bubb, please, a member of the public? Welcome, Mr. Bubb. You've got 3 minutes when you're prepared.
Yep, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So my name's Michael Bubb. I've lived in a Pave Lane farm area for 51 years, only some 20 feet away from the Norwood. I also speak on behalf of Tom, our tractor driver, who is only 15 feet from the fire escape where these current people stay at night, late. Also on behalf of the 43 protesters who are local residents, whom I'm all familiar with the people involved, including the proprietor of the Norwood, and I've also met some of the new neighbours taking advantage of this scheme. I realise the officers have to deal with the facts in front of them. I've lived with this application now for almost 2 years and have witnessed how it has ducked and dived with additions and withdrawals, and now simply new bedrooms, 5. This is totally a misguided application in that the total objective is to have a house of multiple occupancy. Our residents feel intimidated, disturbed in all sense of the word. These people are right amongst us where we haven't had this sort of approach before. And it's definitely a case of one person's profit at the expense of law-abiding, decent people's way of life. I appreciate some of the committee have taken the trouble to visit the site this afternoon, of which I thank you. Once darkness falls, as you know, sound will travel even further. These current guests are cooped up all day. There's no garden for them to go out. There's no parks, no shops. And with the result that they really only surface in the afternoon and then party half the night, which is totally contrary to hard-working people trying to get a good night's sleep. The problem is they don't know when to stop and how the bad language comes across, and our windows are very much open at nights in this hot weather, and you can't help but be disturbed. So I asked the committee, with the power to override these officers, in this case, to put a halt to this progression towards a house of multiple occupancy. You have the power to do it. I know the officers have got a job to do, but I would ask you to use common sense and common decency towards the local people. This application is a sham. This lovely hotel and restaurant, country bar, should not be used as it is now, but in the future as it has been for the last 50 years. I therefore ask you to object to this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bull. Mark, back to you.
Thank you, Chair. So this application, as has been noted, is for the change of use of an existing restaurant function room facility at Norwood House into the 5 additional hotel rooms. The rooms have been described as budget accommodation and have shared bathroom and kitchenette facilities, which members will have seen during the site visit. In terms of the principle of development, the hotel is operating as an existing use, and the proposed rooms would further the existing facilities. The site does fall within the rural area where new development is strictly controlled. However, for the purposes of tourism, the rural area is appropriate as it has facilities nearby to support the business associated with tourism. The local planning authority consider that whilst the site has been described as isolated within the consultation comments, for tourism purposes, the site's location is considered appropriate and successful. Concerns have been raised during the consultation stage by Councillor Eade, Chetwynd, Aston and Woodcote Parish Council and a series of local residents. Particular concerns in respect of the current occupiers of the hotel, as the site is currently being used as a temporary accommodation to house vulnerable individuals from a Shropshire charity during the pandemic. This is a temporary measure and is not the subject of the current application. The application is seeking the conversion of part of the dining facilities into hotel rooms. The local planning authority have made a recommendation based upon the content of the application as submitted for consideration, alongside appropriate conditions to restrict the occupancy. In respect of the point made by Councillor Reid regarding the 28-day vacancy period following a stay by any resident, this is something that can be supported by officers and can be amended through through the proposed condition to ensure that any resident within those rooms must vacate the property for 28 days following their stay. So that's leaving the property completely, as opposed to kind of transferring between any rooms as well. And that's considered to be precise and reasonable, and has the support of the applicant as well. In respect of the status of the rooms and the absence of ensuite facilities, there is no guidance in planning legislation to prevent the use of shared facilities within hotels. The concerns extend to the layout of the rooms, as these do not have windows. However, the authority is in continued dialogue with the Council's Building Control regarding these elements and any remediation works which could form part of an informative as part of any grant of planning permission. In respect of the sunlight tunnels within each of the rooms, they have not yet been implemented. So whilst the works that members will have viewed on site today note significant works that have taken place, those works are to facilitate accommodation purposes for the use that it's currently being occupied for. Following the grant of any permission, if that's how the committee resolves, we would be proposing that the development is implemented in accordance with all plans. So that would involve the implementation of those sunlight tunnels to rooms 7, 8, 9 and 10 within 6 months of any permission being granted. The local planning authority consider there are no grounds to object to the principle of the development, and the scheme would support an existing business. In respect of the replacement windows, the council's conservation officer has accepted the principle and has sought appropriate conditions for the joinery and materials, and appropriately scaled drawings to review the detail of those. In terms of one final point of clarification, in terms of the management of the site on a day-to-day basis, so there would be no on-site manager. The applicants do not live on the property throughout the time. The site is surveyed by cameras throughout the property, for which the owners have full access to. All occupants, upon checking in, are made aware of the fire process in case of fire, and they are required to sign acceptance of and an understanding of what is to occur when they're checking in. Again, this is a fairly typical strategy for a lot of similar accommodations throughout the country. So accordingly, the recommendation remains as outlined within the reports committee, namely to grant full planning permission subject to the conditions as outlined, with the amendment to allow for the 28-day period following occupation of residence. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mark. It's before the committee. Janice?
Can I ask, how will we monitor the 28-day residency? Also, car parking, I do have concerns there. Having said that, it's counteracted by there's going to be 5 additional rooms, whereas that was a function room before, which I would assume held a lot more than 5 people. So that might not be an issue, a new issue. In fact, it might improve the issue. Do we have any police reports, or is it not necessary for us to have that over the last months? Because I do have concerns about the management of what's going to happen there, including the fire procedure.
In terms of police records, I don't have any details of that, but it's important to note how the nature of the building would function through grant of any permission would be wholly different to how it is currently operating. So whilst at the minute it is used to house those vulnerable persons, the permission is sought for budget hotel accommodation. They're very distinctly different uses. So I'm not sure what merit would kind of been gained from those police reports. But in any case, kind of any noise, nuisance, disturbance would be kind of a matter for consideration by the police at that time. But I'm not aware of anything directly from the police.
My concerns there are that, from what we're being told, it hasn't been managed very well over the past 18 months or so.
In terms of the management of the building, it's just the permission would lie with the land as opposed to the kind of the operator of the site. So we can't control. In theory, the site could be sold tomorrow to a different operator, and it could be run in a wholly different manner. In terms of the parking arrangement, I'd say you're absolutely correct there with what you say in terms of the existing function room use. It's whilst the highway officer notes that it would kind of have a comparable parking provision, I think we've all kind of been to functions and know that there can be quite a lot of people who attend a function, and you're kind of offsetting that against the provision of these 5 additional rooms, which are likely to have a maximum of one car per room. In terms of the final point I think you raised, which was the how we would go about monitoring, that's all kind of through the submission of this kind of report, that, which would be through keeping logs essentially of when people are checking in, who it is who's staying there and checking into that room in the period of time that they're staying for. So if there's kind of an enforcement complaint that comes in, we're able to kind of gather that information or seek that information from the hotel operator and kind of check that ourselves.
Graham? And then Peter.
My concern was that there was no windows in any of the rooms. What's the fire regulation on that? Because there's only, if there's a fire, there's only that one corridor. What's the regulations?
In terms of the regulations themselves, I'm not wholly up to date on that. I don't know.
They're controlled through our building regulations.
Is it class of safety, is it?
And so there has been dialogue all through this process with our building regulation team, okay? And we're aware of what is required, as well as the applicant is aware in terms of what needs to happen to meet those standards. And that's another separate element of legislation that we can enforce against. So it's separately, and we'll be clear in terms of informative that those works still need to happen.
Peter?
Thank you, yeah. I have no problem with the car parking situation. I think it manages itself in many ways and has done over the years, and occasionally, yeah, it has overgrown, you know, with people with cars, but I think it's adequate for what it needs to be. And I also have no problem about the windows, because it's going to look exactly the same once they've done the work. I think what this is key here is the use going forward. I've heard the speakers and what they've said, obviously, and the people that live close to it have got complaints. I've seen things on social media when people talk about it. You know, it's an issue. However, one thing that Newport area doesn't have is budget accommodation. Very little, very little. So what I would want to know is, going forward with this, if we were to approve it, how confident can we be that it will remain simply budget accommodation in the future? As far as it being an HMO for vulnerable people, what are the possibilities of it coming back in the future? And just to confirm, the 28 days, which is fine, there's no return within 28 days either. Is that correct?
That is correct. So it's a maximum occupancy of 28 days, which would then need to be followed with a 28-day.
Okay. So really, it's about, my question is about the usage of this place going forward as a budget hotel and not as an HMO.
So in terms of the budget accommodation, I think the key element here is to note that each room doesn't have kind of an ensuite facility. That's kind of what you would typically expect from kind of anything above that budget accommodation threshold. So it's that kind of shared facilities in my mind. And there isn't the rooms, you saw the size of the rooms today, kind of by looking at room 10, there isn't the opportunity to kind of retrofit and install those in and still kind of have that sufficient circulation space around the bed and stuff. So it wouldn't be feasible to accommodate it in there. So it would always kind of have to continue with that shared facility. And in my mind, that's probably what's going to keep it as a budget accommodation. In terms of your second point, which was regarding the potential for it to kind of revert to this HMO function, that's not what's being applied for. If the nature and how it kind of operated were to change and it were to kind of become akin to that, that in itself is a material change of use for which planning permission would be required, and we would consider that on its merits at that time. That isn't what's being applied for now, and it would kind of come down to if local residents thought it was being used in that manner, then to kind of report that, we would investigate that accordingly at that time.
So to be clear then, that going forward, it will not be used for its current use, and any changes in the future would require further permission. Right, okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Nigel?
Yeah, thanks. Well, I was glad I went on the site visit, and yeah, the thing is that, you know, when is a hotel not a hotel, really? I mean, there's different rules and regulations for houses of multiple occupancy, and I mean, this isn't a hotel because there's nobody there. There's no staff on there at all, and I feel a bit sorry for the people that are put there, because as has been pointed out, there's no facilities, no transport, no amenity space. What the hell do they do all day? I really don't know. In fact, it reminded me of a bit of an immigration centre more than anything. I am a bit concerned that, as we saw on site, the bedrooms are finished. However, the plans indicate that the sun tubes So I want, you know, if I was to support this, I'd want it conditioning that those sun tubes are actually put in, and to make sure that they actually happen. You know, sort of the existing, well, the dining facilities that's left, or you know, as concerned reading the report, once we go around, that's fine. The parking provision, well, I'm sorry, but the parking provision isn't going to be adequate, and certainly if the bar is going to be utilised, there's virtually no parking spaces outside. It is on a bad bend, so I don't think the parking provision is sufficient. I mean, obviously there's a big area at the back, but you indicated that that's not parking area for this particular property. I'm happier with having a limit to 28 days residency. But I mean, you know, sort of we need to decide whether or not it's a hotel or a house of multiple occupancy, and at the moment it's a bit vague at the moment, and there are different rules and regulations regarding which it actually is. I mean, in discussion on the site visit, it seemed to be very vague as to who was actually, where these people were coming from. Or indicated that it's Shropshire Council that are putting people up in here, and it's not Telford and Wrekin. So so you know, sort of there's really too many questions, and you know, sort of I'm just I'm not convinced that this is the right proposal for this particular property.
In terms of the occupation of the property as existing, that's not a consideration for the merits of the current scheme before us. It is proposed to be used in a distinctly different, or operated in a distinctly different way to how it is currently operating. And the minute it's quite clear that it's being used to house those vulnerable persons, that is a temporary measure. The conversion works that took place at the time to accommodate those persons kind of is why the scheme is noted as part retrospective at the time. It was done quite quickly to kind of make it a appropriate accommodation to house them at that time. In terms of what the application is for, it is for hotel accommodation. It would need to work within that kind of remit of kind of what constitutes a hotel, and that's where we've kind of come up with those restrictions in terms of the occupation. Or limiting the occupation to kind of so that it is temporary, which is kind of what you would expect from how a typical hotel operates. In terms of kind of the way the works kind of took place, and it's noted on the plans. I addressed this kind of in the introduction regarding the light tunnels. Those works haven't taken place yet because the applicant hadn't got planning permission to kind of operate as he intends. So we are proposing a condition that within 6 months of the grant of planning permission, that the development must be undertaken and completed in accordance with the plans, which note and we can make it quite clear that that is to include the sunlight tunnels as well. The sunlight tunnels are proposed to be kind of inward facing, so away from the public realm. It would be a series of 4, and that does involve kind of various works needed to the roof. So the applicant didn't want to undertake those works without kind of knowing that planning permission was going to be forthcoming. So hopefully, and then in terms of the parking provision, I know kind of your concerns there. The development has been considered by the highway engineer in terms of the level of parking required, and does consider that in the current case the additional rooms is offset by the function, the provision that would be required from the function room, so doesn't require any additional parking spaces.
Can I ask a quick question, Chair, while we're on that?
Yes.
From what date would it change its current usage to the expected usage?
So if we were conditioning that the development, expecting the works to be undertaken within 6 months, it would be at the stage that those works were kind of completed. So at the time that the sunlight tunnels were implemented, and that would have to be within that 6 month
So
period.
it won't become a budget hotel for 6 months?
But the use of the hotel is there as existing. That is its existing land use. It's unauthorised use at the moment as a HMO because of the COVID pandemic, and we've been asked to proactively enforce by government to be able to house, as necessary, those that were vulnerable at that time. And that legislation still exists in terms of our proactive enforcement, okay, in terms of how we're looking at things and allowing these things to happen without effectively taking enforcement measures. So the use at this moment is unauthorised, okay?
So would it be fair
But
to say...
what we'll be doing is we're moving forward,
Yeah.
is we'll start to enforce against that. Regardless of the consent, that would need to be resolved. So the land use as a hotel still exists, and the land use that we're proposing here in front of you is still for it to be that hotel and restaurant. All it's asking for is the additional extension, the change of use of that dining facility, that restaurant, to become those additional bedrooms to serve existing use.
So in a simplistic way,
Yeah.
the only way to improve the lot of the people around that area is to change the use to a budget hotel so that this HMO situation goes away.
The HMO situation will go away as we come out of the pandemic,
Right.
So they haven't.
because we'll be
Whenever that-
enforcing against.
I get it, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
So when's that legislation being lifted?
There's various parts of legislation that exist around the COVID aspects. Some of still exist until March 22 in terms of the use of restaurants and bars and public houses as takeaways. So there's various different ones. There's nothing specific in terms of with regard to change of use for HMO specifically, but the legislation in terms of the minister's statements are clear, proactively enforce.
So, sorry, I want to get clear in my mind really. So if we were to approve this, basically as far as the disruption that's been happening, so we're told, I don't see it myself, but I don't live up there, the end is nigh for that, as long as things go as we expect in terms of legislation.
Yeah.
In other words, once it becomes a budget hotel and functions as that only and not an HMO, it'd be a better thing for everybody. Okay, thank you.
Any other comments from the committee? Yes, Jim.
In conclusion, the HMO is enforced on the hotel at the moment by the government legislation, and we can't override that enforcement at this point in time.
We can be, but as a council we've opted to leave this at this moment, and as we're coming out of the pandemic, bearing in mind we've only just literally come out of lockdown, and whatever those next phases are, we're just reviewing that until the point that we enforce.
Charles?
Yes.
Yeah. Mark, Andrew's, emphasised the fact that he's more or less saying stop, pause, consult the highway and defer. Is there any value in that, consulting the highway?
To consult the highway engineer,
We have we?
the highway engineer has been consulted as part of the application, and their view is that the proposed change of use wouldn't result in any additional requirement for parking.
Okay.
Okay, any further comments? Well, can I bring in the solicitor then to talk about the conditions?
Oh, very, very, very brief point. It's just we usually put, and I'm talking about the need for some flexibility in how we propose these conditions. We usually we give Val's team authority to finalise conditions and reasons for approval to be delegated to Development Management Services, Delivery Management. We usually put that on, but it just seems to have slipped off the recommendation. So if we could have that on this, it would give Val and her team the flexibility to respond to the comments you've made.
Okay. I think the other condition we talk about is no return within 28 days.
Yeah.
explore that as well.
Chair, we wouldn't be looking at as an additional condition, it would be in the actual condition that's proposed to make it precise and enforceable, so it would be added into it.
It will be added into it.
Added into it rather than as an additional condition on that restriction of occupation.
Yeah, because that's important. That 28 days could become 56 days and so on. If not careful. But no return is important. So that will be written in. Okay. Right, the recommendations are before you. All those in favour of the recommendations, please show. Against? 2 against. Thank you. So that application is allowed. We now need to make sure that the conditions, with the conditions are there. That's what we did. Yeah. To agree the conditions. So we need to make sure that the conditions are followed by our trustees with those, don't you? Now come to the next one, which is, I've lost it now, it's so important. Continue receipt 2021-0364, land south of Newcomen Way, Woodside, Telford. Mark, you want to introduce this one?
Thank you, Chair. By means of an update to the committee report, members should have received a written update noting the increase in the number of shared ownership properties from 4 to 7, alongside the requisite reduction in the number of affordable rent properties, which has received the support of the Council's housing officer. A supplementary plan noting the revised mix has also been circulated. The application site comprises just under 0.6 of a hectare of agricultural pasture land located in the Rough Park area of Woodside, access from Newcomen Way to the north via a new access road from the neighbouring development site, currently under construction and consisting of 55 dwellings. The application seeks full planning permission for the erection of 21 affordable housing units, including 14 affordable rent and 7 shared ownership, together with associated access and landscaping. 8 letters of objection have been received, noting a series of concerns, including, albeit not limited to, environmental impacts, flooding, highway matters and noise and disturbance. No comments have been received from either Madeley Town Council or the Gorge Parish Council. All technical officers raised no objection to the development subject to conditions. The site is located within the Telford urban area. It's close to a range of goods, services and public transport links and is considered to be in a sustainable location. Officers are satisfied that the principle of development is acceptable. The site was allocated for residential development within the Madeley Neighbourhood Development Plan and was allocated for in the region of 50 units. The submitted plan demonstrates the number of proposed dwellings could be accommodated without appearing cramped or overdevelopment at an overall density of 17.7 dwellings per hectare. The layout reflects the Madeley neighbourhood plan by ensuring the houses provide good overlooking of the public open space. The footpath link across the green space will have good surveillance, being overlooked by housing that provides a well-defined edge and then active street frontage to the new area of landscape open space. The proposed house is a traditional brick with dual-pitched roofs. The design seeks a clear and modern approach with large painted glass to provide contemporary housing with good light ingress and highly useful internal spaces. The development looks to include 21 house type plans within different configurations. Additionally, active gable options have been provided to take account of dwellings at the ends of streets. The proposals look to utilise a limited palette of materials and utilise the surroundings to enhance the general appearance. However, to provide slight difference, the elevations use a mix of a red and red multi-brick to provide subtle interest to the street elevations. The plans confirm that 21 units can be accommodated on the site, and the proposal will have no material impact upon the normal operation of the highway network or highway safety. Officers are satisfied that the proposed vehicular access will be acceptable with a single access being sufficient and no requirement to provide a secondary access or the provision of a controlled pedestrian crossing on Woodside Avenue. The site is sustainably located within walking distance of a range of services and good access to public transport. It makes more effective use of the land that has already been accepted in principle. The proposal has been appropriately designed and will not result in any adverse unacceptable impacts on the site or surrounding environment. It has been demonstrated to be in accordance with the planning policies of the development plan taken as a whole. The proposal generates the requirement for financial contributions towards education, children's play and sport recreation and affordable housing. The recommendation therefore remains as per the committee report, namely to delegate authority to be granted to the Development Management Service Delivery Manager to grant full planning permission subject to a Section 106 agreement relating to the referenced education contributions towards the upgrade and improvement of nearby play facilities, contributions towards improvement to nearby sport and recreation facilities and affordable housing, and the outlined conditions as per the original committee report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Open to the committee. There's no public speakers. Peter?
No, yeah, well, that's a key thing in a sense. There are no speakers. You've got a parish council and a town council that have got no comments to make on it. That speaks volumes to me, and it's 21 affordable housing, which we've talked about a lot in recent times. So, quite honestly, what's not to like on this one? It's on white land. It's not going to cause anyone any grief. So, I fully support it. Thank you.
Janice?
It's just a comment really from my part is, are there any more plans for building more houses in this particular area?
In terms of the...
Along this area. My issues are, I know that road is getting busier and busier, and yeah, I think you could cope with this, and I don't have an issue with this, but moving forward we will need to look at traffic management.
Sure. And that would be considered at that time. In terms of the immediate sites, when the previous scheme came in for 55, there was always kind of this kind of site was always set aside possibly for future development, but this kind of completes that parcel of land.
Right, that's okay.
Nigel?
Yeah, there you go. Well, I'm very glad that Madeley hasn't objected to it, because if it's in their neighbourhood plan, it would be really ridiculous if they did. The only question I've got is, in less than 10 years' time, everybody who lives there, if they want a new car, is going to be buying an electric car. So, are all the electrics in the houses going to be capable of charging electric cars? And where, is there space for everybody to charge an electric car? Because this is what's going to happen right the way across the borough for every house. And if they haven't got sufficient, if A, their electrics aren't capable of doing it, and B, there isn't anywhere to charge their cars, well then, we're failing in our duty really. So all new properties need to be capable of doing that from now on really.
In terms of the capacity of kind of the network to support each house having sufficient power generation, I suppose, or electric capability, I don't know the capacity of the network, if I'm perfectly honest.
Well, my understanding is it's not so much the network, it's the actual wiring in the house is capable of actually being able to carry that capacity if it's there.
Because I've kind of looked at it in the past that it's kind of each property having that electric vehicle charging point of the facility to kind of do that. I think that's kind of something that can be quite simply accommodated into the kind of building rather than kind of retrofitting. But so I think in terms of the wiring, it can be capable of achieving that. But in terms of whether the network is capable of feeding that level, that I don't know.
Because my understanding is there are a significant number of properties whereby when these charging point installers come, they can't do it because the system in the house can't take whatever. I mean, I'm not an expert, but can't actually do it because of the power drain or whatever this it causes. So it's just something that we're going to need to build into every new build from now on.
In terms of the local plan moving forward, any review will deal with that. At this moment, the policy isn't there for us to enforce that it's compulsory. That was considered within this local plan that's adopted now, but at that time it wasn't considered viable, and there were technologies that were out there that significantly advanced since that point. So there's nothing in terms of from a planning policy perspective to enforce and insist on that installed in every application. We are trying to encourage developers to install them as we're moving forward, and again in building regs as well, but I haven't got the policy basis in which to do that, so I don't have the backing as yet. Now the local authority are looking at electric charging points and starting to create that strategy, and that will then indicate and provide the evidence for what the local plan will have in it as a policy. But and remember, it was considered at that time to have it in the 2018 local plan as a policy, but as it went through consultation, it was removed.
Why?
Because of the issues around viability. So if you think about how a local plan was made, which was probably around 2016, in terms of actually having the actual plan ready, and then it goes through its various consultations, the technology was quite expensive.
It's going to have to happen now.
It will do, and it will come through both with the local plan policy as well as building regs.
I think it would be a shame if the opportunity isn't taken to install the appropriate cables at the time of build. The reason I say that is because the additional costs will not be significant. It's really, at the moment, we're building a house and we're installing cables to deal with domestic appliances in the main, and now we're building a house and we want to deal with something that demands greater power. So the only difference would be that the supply to the house would need to be a thicker cable going from the mains into the house, and therefore they would be able to accommodate it. So I don't think there's a major problem from an electronical point of view, and therefore I think it's well worth talking to the developer on it.
We can certainly put an informative on the bottom of any consent in terms of direction to install.
Any other comments?
Move it, Charles.
Moved, seconded. All those in favour, please show. That's unanimous. That brings us to the end of the meeting.